The Alchemist Ring, audiobook performed by author Jason Lee Willis. Chapter 10, October 1695, The Tower of London. His Majesty's Royal and Fortress of the Tower of London, more commonly known as the Tower of London, rests upon the north bank of the River Thames. Built by William the Conqueror in 1078, it has been used by British kings primarily as a prison, a tradition sustained through 1695 with King William III. However, it served other purposes as well. With two defensive walls, a moat, and a complex of several buildings around the White Tower, it was a stronghold for British power. The constable of the tower was in charge of the castle itself, but the complex also housed an armory, a public record office, the crown jewels of England, a treasury, and the Royal Mint, where Isaac Newton served as warden. At 52, Newton had already built a career within the scientific community with his studies on mathematics, light, mechanics, and gravity, making him a known name within both Trinity College, Cambridge, and numerous universities around the world. With his professional legacy secure, Newton transitioned from scientist to government official in order to secure his personal desires. Although Warden of the Mint sounded prestigious when secured for him by the Earl of Halifax, Newton's work amenities were adequate. Instead of telescopes and microscopes, he had a few handheld magnifying glasses. Instead of racks filled with specimen jars, he had a uniform set of legal texts. Instead of rugs, tapestries, paintings, and sweet scented candles, he had a large wooden table with a crooked chair. An investment in the future, he reminded himself as he began arranging the coinage upon the table, picking up each piece to study and then placing it in its correct spot. He dutifully noted the details in one ledger and then wrote his findings in another. An hour into his tedious work, a knock came on the door. "Enter," he called out. The sergeant-at-arms unlocked the door from outside, and at his side, the hunched form of Bernard Clerval appeared. "Have I not introduced you to my manservant?" Newton said, removing his spectacles. "This is my shadow, a man who allows me to be in two places at once. When you see this misshapen form and grotesque features, imagine you are looking upon my avatar, and treat him with all respect and authority due me. Even though I did not conjure him up in a test tube, he is one of my finest creations. If we are to work together, I need for this man to come and go as I see fit. Is that understood?" "Of course," the sergeant-at-arms nodded, taking his chastisement meekly. "Could you fetch the captain?" "Yes, Warden," the sergeant answered. Bernard shuffled by, sat at another chair by the fire, and stuck his hands out from under his heavy cape. Newton, noting how Bernard focused on the warmth of the fire, walked slowly back to the table. "Apologies, Mr. Clerval. I only teased to help the sergeant understand that you still had your place." "I'm only trying to understand which of my features you feel is grotesque." "Oh, come now. You know I didn't mean it. You must have exciting news to come all this way instead of waiting for me to get home." Bernard grinned, his crooked teeth reflecting the light from the fire. "News from abroad." "The war in America?" "No, but you should know that Lemoyne is regrouping for another assault, and it appears he plans to push the colonials out of the St. Lawrence River. If he does this, New France will strengthen." "Yes, I am aware of the talents of d'Iberville. What news do you bring me?" "A tragic story." "Well, let me pull the chair over to the fire and you can regale me with this tale," Newton said before joining Bernard. "Go on." "Are you familiar with the Islamic ritual known as Hajj?" Yes, when religious pilgrims journey to Mecca. The Grand Mughal, Emperor Aurangzeb, allowed his daughter to travel from Bombay to Mecca in a caravan of 25 ships. As the convoy returned through the Straits of Mandab, they were attacked by pirates. Indeed. Tell me, Bernard, who would be bold enough to attempt such vile action? A bounty has been placed upon the captains and crews of the 6 pirate ships who attacked the convoy. Captain Richard Want and the crew of the Dolphin, William May and the crew of the Pearl, Thomas Wake and the crew of the Susanna, Captain Joseph Farrow and the crew of Portsmouth Adventure, and Captain Henry Avery and the crew of the Fancy. Long Ben Avery? But he's... The hunchback nodded. Yes. His associations with Indian Ocean pirates are noted, and now being explored by the Crown. It is said he's gone into hiding, given command of his ship to a Scottish rogue named Dalziel. All of them have bounties on their heads. And once the first pirate is captured, it won't take long to find Avery. You mentioned 6 crews, but only listed 5. Yes, it seems Captain Thomas, too, was killed in battle, and all of his officers are in the possession of the Emperor already. Long Ben doubled back and freed the other half of the crew before returning his attention to the Ganji Sawai. Ganji Sawai. Hindi. For exceeding treasure. A poor choice for naming a ship, unless you think you've got it properly secured. Long Ben stripped away her escort and with a lucky shot disabled the mothership. He boarded her with 3 separate crews in a battle that lasted hours. When they took the ship, the slaughter had only begun. Oh dear, here comes the tragedy you spoke. When the pirates learned the princess of the Mughal Empire was on board, they used this against the prisoners. First, they publicly tortured prisoners, and then took to raping the princess's entourage, but finally, they turned their vile attention to the princess herself. Really? Long Ben Avery let the princess be raped? Raped and murdered, which is why Emperor Aurangzeb seized control of Bombay and arrested key members of the East Indian Trading Company. Did he? Bernard chuckled. If he couldn't handle it, he never should have let his daughter risk her life for a few prayers. Ganji Sawai, Newton repeated. How did the Emperor know his daughter had been raped? Didn't Long Ben kill everyone leading up to the princess? Oh, he spared Captain Ibrahim. Newton snapped his finger. There it is. I don't follow. Exceeding treasure. Have I not taught you about Emperor Aurangzeb, Bernard? He's the Grand Mogul. What else is there to know? Well, in his 30 years upon the throne, he's turned the Mughal Empire into the largest economic power in the world, even greater than China. And the size of his empire? Oh, he has 158 million subjects and a territory larger than England, France, and Spain combined. He's the most powerful leader in the world, but he allowed one of his daughters to be raped by pirates? Why would he even risk it? It was the Hajj. Well, so you said earlier. But here's what you don't know. When he was 15, he was almost trampled to death by a war elephant. It must have been terrifying knowing that you're destined to become the most powerful man in the world, yet a dumb beast does not understand who it's trying to step on. Bernard chuckled, stamping his foot on the floor. Yes, Bernard, poor Aurangzeb was shaken to the core, which explained the course of his reign. He used the Sunni faith to galvanize his country, and his aggressions to expand his territory. Before his coronation, it is told that the young princeling memorized the entire Quran. You do know what the Quran is, right, Bernard? It's the Muslim Bible. Yes, albeit a tenth of the size, but still a remarkable feat. His piety and devotion to his faith continued once he became emperor, But when one memorizes the Quran at such a young age, what challenges are left? Do you know what King Solomon requested of the Lord? Wisdom. Yes, and he was granted this wisdom in his youth, and like Aurangzeb, his empire prospered. However, in his old age, King Solomon's quest for knowledge was his undoing. He began studying foreign gods and religions to satiate his spiritual intellectual appetite. Newton took a moment to sip his drink. Now, I ask you, Bernard, would this man name the flagship after a daughter? Ah, Bernard flashed his crooked grin. The Ganji Sawai carried another great treasure other than his daughter. And the most tragic part of this terrible tale is that the emperor used her as a shield for that treasure. That is the reason why Long Ben Avery tortured and raped the princess. And when Long Ben got what he wanted, he let Captain Ibrahim go free to live with his shame, and also to shame the emperor. Long Ben must indeed have quite a big bushwhacker to anger such a powerful man. Yes, I'm sure the emperor will rain down fire and brimstone for as long as it suits him. If he was cold enough to use his daughter to shield a treasure, he'll pressure every ambassador to deliver the heads of these pirates. And while England apologizes to him, he'll fatten his trade control in the region. What treasure do you suppose he had on that ship? It doesn't really matter, does it? While it certainly had historical value to a zealot, it most likely meant the world. Does that answer disappoint you? For Long Ben to commit such atrocities, it must have been quite a treasure. Bernard's face flashed enthusiasm like a child at Christmas. Let me remind you, Bernard, that we are above all this pettiness. As much as I despise the Catholic Church and its idolatrous pageantry, I also despise these zealots that look to the past for answers. We will help humanity be guided to the true freedom. Of course, Bernard grew solemn again. I only wanted to understand Aurangzeb's motivations. Then let me speculate, Newton offered. While most of the news concerns him expanding into the southern parts of the Indian subcontinent, he has also privately pushed through the Himalayas to a place called Mount Kailash, a holy place for 4 major religions, and referred to as the spiritual center of the world. Alexander the Great sought to find the secrets of this place before he was forced to return to the Middle East, which is where the Ganji Sawai just traveled. Ah, tit for tat. He traded treasures for treasures with the Arabs. This is all speculation, of course, but whatever he carried in that ship belongs to Henry Avery and the Order of Eos now. A rap came on the door. Newton stood quickly. That will be the captain. Do you want me to leave? Oh, no. Not while I have this fly caught in my web. Opportunities like this happen once in a generation. You stay right where by that fire and warm yourself, or you'll be frozen to the bone by the time this day ends. I don't like the sound of that. Newton opened the door. As warden of the Mint, he had a dozen royal soldiers appointed to him, although they normally spent their time patrolling the grounds of the compound. I've examined the coins given to us by the magistrate in Surrey, and I've written my analysis. The first man should be let go. The second should be hanged for treason on the grounds of counterfeiting. The third man needs to be brought to me so I can interrogate him properly. If I am to serve King William and Queen Mary properly, as a loyal subject, I must root out corruption wherever I see it. Hanged? That is my recommendation, but the magistrate will have to make the determination himself, Captain. Now, go fetch this Robert Harley, and we'll see what sort of tale he has to tell me. The captain did as commanded, allowing Newton to return to the fire, where Bernard studied him for a few moments before saying, You look at these coins with a magnifying glass. and condemn a man to death. Warden of the Mint has certain privileges my predecessors did not appreciate. I will define the office before I am through. I'm sure you will. So, where am I going? I'm going to be writing letters most of the day, so until I'm ready to have them delivered, you need to find 2 men for me. First, find Captain Richard Cass down at the docks. Luckily for us, he's just arrived from America. I'd like to avoid using Captain Wiggins, so use your best charm to bring Cass here. And the second? I need you to bring me Roger Silverthorne. He's a Norfolk man. Norfolk? Please don't make me go to Norfolk. I hate East Anglia. I didn't say he was in Norfolk. I said he's a Norfolk man. If I'm not mistaken, he's currently stationed in Nassau. Bring him to me. Nassau? But that's... In the Bahamas, yes. We have an opportunity to strike our enemies, Bernard. When I am through, the Priory of Ormus will rid the world of these zealots. Thanks to vile Captain Avery and foolish Emperor Aurangzeb, I'll be able to collect on a bill long overdue. Chapter 11. Boston, Massachusetts, 1696. Louis Armand Guerin stood at the ship railing and watched Captain Kidd paddle into Town Cove at the heart of Boston Harbor. For the first time in months, Guerin was surrounded by civilization. The ship anchored between the harbor barricade and the busy docks. Compared to Quebec City and Montreal, Boston Harbor dwarfed the French cities with its vast markets and grand forts filling the horizon. If I jumped into the water, I could vanish on one of those busy streets before Firkin or Del Toro could muster a firing squad. Unfortunately, January snows reminded him of the hypothermia that would certainly kill him if he dared. Guerin turned back to the ship, where the crew busied themselves with supplies for the coming voyage. Guerin held a clipboard to keep track of each ship that brought supplies. I could bribe the New Englanders. The next supply boat could ferry me away to safety. In Boston, he'd be penniless in a foreign country. New France and New England were still at war, and he didn't know any periphery agents in New England. Finding passage to Europe seemed unlikely. After unloading the Spanish and French loot, the cargo holds were being filled mostly with food rather than ammunition. An Atlantic crossing. Could I be so lucky? A few weeks earlier, they'd been in the Bahamas when Captain Kidd scrapped all of his plans to return home. Some speculated there'd been a Robert Culliford sighting, but the insistence on speed and secrecy made Guerin doubt the theory. Something's happened. Typically, trips across the Atlantic were made beginning in April instead of January, but Captain Kidd hurried like his life depended on it. The Haitian cook, Pierre Dulac, appeared at Guerin's side. 3 more loads and your hold should be full, Guerin noted. What are we doing in this frozen hell, Gareth? Dulac asked. To the crew, he was still Gareth, the quick-witted first mate who was better with the jokes than the sword. This is tropical compared to New France. I suppose you and Del Toro have spent your lives sailing the Caribbean Sea. I hate to tell you where I think we're going. The men think we're heading to harass Acadia. Guerin chuckled. I certainly can't get captured in French territory. Somewhere far to the northwest, his only friend and ally, Gaspar, served the best interests of the platoon, followed by the interests of the periphery, which meant keeping all parties out of the lands beyond the Great Lakes. Good Lord, I've been on this ship for almost 3 years now. Is the Philosopher's Stone still there, waiting to be dug up? What are we doing, Gareth? Where are we going? Manuel del Toro asked. Del Toro was Spanish for of the bull, which evidently was a name given to him for his thick features. With a wide face, wide shoulders, and massive arms, Del Toro was the strongest man on the ship. Even though Del Toro had a Spanish name, the portly man despised Europeans. He hailed from the original Taino chieftains who lived on the island of Puerto Rico before Columbus arrived. At least that is what his grandmother had claimed. The Taino ruled the seas around Cuba, the Bahamas, Jamaica, Hispaniola, and Puerto Rico, waging sea battles with the Carib Indians who lived on the smaller islands to the southeast. Later, his family avoided capture and slavery by taking to the sea and fishing. Del Toro's knowledge of the local reefs turned into a career upon the ocean as guide and eventually as a quartermaster. Captain Kidd won the services of Del Toro 2 years earlier in a poker game. I hate to tell you this, but I think we're about to sail across the Atlantic for jolly old England, Garin offered. I made the trip more than a decade ago, and I'm still a bit seasick from the crossing. We'll need every pound of food and every drop of water. See that nothing is wasted on fair weather days. Both officers cursed under their breath and returned to their duties. A few hours later, the ship was supplied, and Captain Kidd returned from the city with 5 strangers. The surgeon, anchoring boatswain, and sailing master were all being retired, which Kidd didn't even bother to convey to the crew. Both the surgeon and sailing master were Englishmen looking to return home, so their stay would only be for the journey. I'd like you to meet Jimmy Duke, a cousin of my wife, and despite his appearance, has several years of experience on combat ships. He'll be our new anchoring boatswain. Jimmy, this French fop is called Gareth, our first mate. Even after all this time, he still barely knows what he's doing on a ship, but he's sharp as a tack. He'll show you around. Jimmy Duke flashed a wide, toothy smile and vigorously shook Garin's hand. With his blond hair and blue eyes, Duke had the face of a schoolboy, and there was something wildly aggressive in his eyes. I'll need this one as an ally in the days to come. After an hour-long tour, Garin paused for a private conversation. We're crossing the Atlantic, aren't we? The grin broadened. I suppose there's no point in secret anymore. Yes, we're lifting anchor and heading to London. We're going to hunt pirates. Excuse me? Why would we need to travel to London to do that? The Caribbean is Madagascar pirates, Duke said, nodding enthusiastically. Culliford. I've jumped into the ship of a madman. A group of pirates led by Thomas II and Henry Avery attacked a Mughal convoy and raped some emperor's daughter. The English crown is hiring experienced captains to travel the Indian Ocean to bring these rogues to justice. Captain Kidd heard of the opportunities through his political connections, so we're rushing to London to not only sign the big contract, but to secure the new warships that are being offered. We're all going to be wealthy men. Madagascar pirates, Garin repeated. You didn't hear anything about Robert Culliford, did you? Culliford? Last I heard, Robert Culliford robbed the wrong ship and ended up in a Gujarati's jail. A Gujarati's jail? What is that? Heck if I know. But ending up in any jail is bad. Of course, these pirates we're hunting, none of them are going into a jail cell. After raping an emperor's daughter, none of them are going to die well. So this isn't about Culliford. And these pirates we're going to hunt have Eos connections. Imagine the stories I'll have to share with Gaspar when I meet him at St. Peter's pearly gates. One more thing, Gareth, Jimmy Duke said. Could you help me go through the anchoring before we leave? I don't want to look like a fool the first time I lift anchor. Jimmy Duke, Manuel del Toro, and Pierre Dulac. A few more, and I'll have enough for a mutiny. Chapter 12. Gujarat, India, 1696. Beginning in 1556, Akbar the Great began the conquest of several Indian provinces that resulted in the creation of the massive Mughal Empire, which would include the modern countries of Bangladesh, Nepal, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. The conqueror of the world, Aurangzeb, prized the region of Gujarat for its historical and financial resources, and due to its proximity to the port city of Bombay, it also became the site of the imperial prisons. Of the 24 prisoners from the Amity who were subsequently taken prisoner by the Quetta merchant, only Professor Josiah Farrow remained in prison. Several months into his imprisonment, Farrow's body had found its equilibrium, with several of his infected wounds now healed and the spare fat around his body gone. Why are they trying to keep me alive? Thousands were detained in the prison, but Farrow stayed in small individual cells high above the rest. He wasn't being punished, he was being interrogated. In the early days, he heeded John Yarlin's advice to play dumb, and despite burns, beatings, and broken fingers, the jailers simply didn't ask the right questions. The torture stopped shortly after John Yarlin vanished, and in a matter of days, he remained the only one from the Amity. A week ago, however, another crew from another ship filled the cells again. At night, in whispered exchanges, information passed between them. "So, what's your story?" the monster next to him asked. "Wrong place at the wrong time," Farrow began, and over the next few days, the details came to light. The ogre in the cell beside him was a German immigrant named John Swan. "We were robbing some palace near Mangalore. Our boats were so full of loot that we were concerned about sinking them. But these damn local fishermen rallied together and put holes in the hull before the men on the ship even knew what was happening. We were left holding our dicks on the shore. What about you?" I'm a former college professor," Farrow began honestly. "I got mixed up with the wrong crowd. I was promised an archaeological tour of ancient Aksum, and now I'll likely die in this prison because of the actions of other men." It took 2 nights to explain archaeological and Aksum to Swan. "It must have been quite a treasure to get you to leave your college. Are you familiar with King Solomon? From the Bible?" "Yes, that King Solomon." Farrow reflected on the enthusiasm his friend Thomas Tew had shown when revealing some of the treasures collected in the White Temple. "The Templar Knights," Tew explained, "found a hidden vault underneath the ruins of the old temple in Jerusalem. Amongst the maps and relics, the Templars also found canisters of a substance that could dissolve metal or stone, along with a story about a magical ring that could control the strange liquid." Farrow had little difficulty unearthing the historical legacy of Solomon's ring. Throughout art and text, the seal of Solomon etched into the ring varied, but most commonly, it held the 2 alchemical symbols for fire and water. While in the brig of the Quetta merchant, Farrow had carved the interlocking triangles within this circle, along with his plea to the universe. Josiah Farrow was here. To finish, he wrote symbols in the ancient language of the Odin stone also. But now, he pondered the purpose of Tew's expedition more than he had before their departure to Abyssinia. When all of the cards are on the table, Two had grinned, we're going to need a key. Right now, out on the frontier of New France, rumors of one of these keys persists. But if we can acquire Solomon's ring from Abyssinia, we control the future. But if secrecy is important, why attack this convoy? As you've seen, the White Temple holds many relics from the past, and Eos has patiently gleaned the earth for centuries for the ring and other significant acquisitions. In my dealings with a sultan from Arabia, I attempted to acquire one of the oldest known sarcophagi in the world. Emperor Aurangzeb outbid me and plans to acquire it. I'm convinced if you evaluate the ancient symbols written upon it, you can unlock other mysteries. In the end, none of them, Josiah Pharaoh, Thomas II, or Emperor Aurangzeb, laid eyes upon the ancient relic. The big brute in the cell beside him breathed heavily during the telling of the story. When the guards brought breakfast, keys jingled, the door swung open, and the big ogre walked down the hall. A moment later, a smaller man replaced Swan in the cell beside Pharaoh. That night, instead of silencing the whispers, a new voice greeted him. I was friends with Thomas, Professor Pharaoh, the new voice explained. If I hadn't been foiled by fishermen, I would have been part of the attack on the Ganges Swai. I might have been able to protect Thomas. I might have been able to prevent your capture. I might have been able to discover the traitor that threatens the Order of Eos. Who are you? Pharaoh asked. I'm Robert Cullerford. I've read your exploits, Pharaoh admitted. Thomas said something right before he made a reference to a trap being set. It's no coincidence that the Emperor wanted the same sarcophagi as two, but I believe it might have been bait. I'm a greedy man, but Thomas was a deeply spiritual man who wholeheartedly believed in his purpose for the Order of Eos. But he had a big mouth. When the Amity lingered behind a wolf pack, you fell into the trap. Why would the Emperor even know about me? I'm a failed Harvard professor. Thomas, too, believed in you. He risked everything to put you in front of his relics. If I owed Thomas, too, my loyalty, then that loyalty extends to you. I'll let you know my secrets in trade for yours. I'm not sure I have any secrets, Pharaoh admitted. Before my capture, I was raiding the Gujaratis' coast for months, and while I did it to fill the coffers of Eos, most of it was kept hidden. I promised one of those treasure stashes to one of the guards in exchange for my freedom. If I could bring you with me, could you still serve Eos by interpreting these ancient relics? Like I told Thomas, it's all theoretical. I've spent decades of my entire adult life sifting through history to understand the mysteries of the past. My professional colleagues mocked my inability to focus on the specific time period or region, but I always felt that by being able to see the larger context, I could see what others didn't. They couldn't see the forest for the trees, Culliford teased and grew silent for a few minutes. So your value wasn't in just identifying the location of Solomon's ring. You were meant to peel away the reasons for its creation. If you were to guess, why did Thomas risk so much to get that sarcophagus? I'm not versed in the lore behind the Order of Eos, but I am well versed in world mythology. To me, the most curious thing about King Solomon isn't the purpose behind the ring, or even the need for the Philosopher's Stone. It is the fact that Solomon believed in the existence of an ancient kingdom ruled by an ancient king. If I were to guess, This prize sarcophagus has ties to this old legend. Huh. Thank you, Professor Farrow. I'm not sure if I can promise you your release, but I can promise that no immediate harm will come to you. Good night. Robert Culliford grew silent for the rest of the night. The next morning, the noise of an unlocking cell woke Professor Farrow. But his cell didn't open. Instead, he saw both John Swan and Robert Culliford standing in the doorway together. A well-dressed Mughal diplomat stood along with the guards. Robert Culliford smiled. Again, I want to thank you, Professor Farrow, for your honesty. I want to emphasize that everything I've done has been to the benefit of the Order of Eos. I can't serve it while stuck in this prison, but when a gift is given to you, you have to accept it. Good luck in your days to come. I wish you well. Culliford and Swan walked down the hall, quite obviously as free men. The finely dressed diplomat lingered, and the remaining guard began unlocking his cell. Trickery is sometimes better than torture, the diplomat added. Your confession verified everything John Yarlin told us, but we had to make sure you were the religious scholar, which you certainly are. The other men in the convoy will bear the brunt of Emperor Rangzub's fury, but you will provide answers to our questions. When you fail to give answers, you will join your friends. What is happening? Farrow asked. You will remain a prisoner, the diplomat added, but your services are needed elsewhere. Chapter 13. Deptford, England, April 6, 1696. Louis Armand Guerin stood behind the wheel so that the new crew understood his role as the first mate, who did nothing. Under Guerin's feet, the most devastating warship ever to be built waited for its maiden voyage. The Adventure Galley combined oars and sails, which made it unique amongst warships. With 3 ship-rigged masts, she certainly looked to be fast, but in battle, or on calm seas, she'd be especially deadly. She also had 32 guns, enough to go nose-to-nose with naval warships. Jimmy Duke hadn't stopped grinning since the old crew stepped onto the new ship. She's a beauty. Pirates won't stand a chance. Captain Kidd should return within the hour, Guerin called out. Are you ready to launch? I was born ready, Duke boasted. But I ain't ever had to sail down a river before. It's a formality, Guerin said. Kidd's English investors want to show off their first pirate hunter to their friends. English politics is kept in balance between the Tories and Whigs, both in America and here in England. The Whigs need us to succeed to remain in power. They've hired the right men, Duke added and jogged off. Kidd's crew teemed with diversity. Along with Taino Manuel del Toro, Haitian cook Pierre Dulac, and American Jimmy Duke, several other officers filled the ranks. The English bulldog Drake Murray served as the provisions bosun and took an immediate dislike to the overly friendly Duke. A few yards behind him, the new sailing master, Nero Bon, organized his nautical charts. Excuse me for asking Master Bon, but how does a landlocked Tibetan end up on an English ship? Bon's leathery face didn't show an emotion, but his eyes twinkled jovially. By not being stupid and by following orders. After decades at sail, Bon's skin was a deep russet, and his thin hair a contrast in bleached white. His mustache tapered to 3-inch wisps at the corner of his mouth, and from the middle of his chin, he kept a braided tuft of hair. I'm a bit perplexed, Guerin coyly began. Our majestic vessel has been put to sea in record time to allow us to hunt these Madagascar pirates. Yet, you've been poring over maps of France all morning. Care to explain? Didn't Captain Kidd tell you? Bond straightened his back and sighed. We're hunting some French diplomat. Is this a joke? Am I the French diplomat? How are we hunting a French diplomat? Spies, apparently. We're going to stay hidden around La Rochelle until this fellow departs for America. Except he's not going to make it to America. All that time could either give the new crew time to learn the job or to go stir crazy. Time will tell, I guess. So you just wandered down the Himalayas one day and decided, I'm going to spend my life on the seas. I'm a trained astronomer, and after learning the stars, I use this knowledge to make a map of our planet. I spent the past 30 years gathering information, and one day it will be complete. Unlike the other members of the crew, navigators are worth our weight in gold to most captains. Good point. Gareth! A voice called out. Garin returned to the wheel just in time to see the new carpenter finish climbing the stairs. Giovanni Naufragio had more black hair on his back, forearms, and ears than he did atop his head. He was born with a classic Roman nose and sweated profusely. This ship is a floating disaster waiting to happen. It's already leaking. Will we sink before we lift anchor? No. Do you have a plan to deal with these leaks? Of course. Then what's the problem? It's a brand new ship. It's the principle of it. Under the fresh coat of paint is a poorly built vessel. I don't think they expect us to last long, Garrett admitted. So the best way to express your frustration is to outlast the boat. But the leaks are already here. Despite his bluster, Naufragio appeared to be a good man, unlike most of the English sailors that joined the American crew. Another ally in my coming mutiny. An hour later, the men hooted and hollered as Captain Kidd returned to the vessel. Garin stood with crossed arms as his captors soaked in the glory. A few minutes later, Jimmy Duke was lifting anchor, and Captain Kidd came to the wheel. Gareth, I'd like to introduce you to our new surgeon, Thomas Barrow. Dr. Barrow, this rogue we like to call Gareth. He's a runt, but has a big brain and an even bigger mouth. You'll like him. He's an outcast from society just like you. With that, the great bully walked to his cabin, leaving Dr. Barrow alone with Garin. An outcast. Yes, I've been disinherited and thrown out of England for medical practices. This ship, it seems, is the last place on Earth for me. Were you sleeping with corpses? Garin asked, straight-faced. Oh, heavens, no. I practiced my surgical arts on the recently expired, that's all. Then I'm happy to have you on board. Stay here for a bit. We'll be presenting our ship and crew to our financiers in just a moment. Del Toro, assemble the officers to the top deck. Half an hour later, the ship approached the turnaround spot at the Tower Bridge. Captain Kidd manned the wheel, and the crew waited silently as they passed under the eyes of the wealthy and elite men who paid for the ship. Dr. Barrow raised his hand for a personal salute to one of the men who stood upon the bridge. Who's that? A friend of my father. He's the one who pulled the strings to get me on this ship. I guess I should be thankful. Jimmy Duke waved vigorously. Stop it, Jimmy, Captain Kidd snarled. These are the same men who hang pirates, especially Doc Barrow's friend. Barrow lowered his arms and looked at his toes sheepishly. Kidd snarled. They've given us a ship, but if we don't follow the parameters of our mission, they'll withhold your wages or worse. Garin rolled his eyes and shrugged. Captain Kidd put all of his strength into the big wheel, and with the use of the oars, the adventure galley pivoted sharply and turned toward the open waters of the English Channel. "Come with me, kid," Garin said and turned to Doc Barrow. "You too." On the bridge, the crowd was already dispersing as the ship sailed down the Thames. "Do you want to know what I think of these fine gentlemen?" Garin asked and began unbuckling his pants. "They can kiss our ass," Jimmy Duke anticipated, and had his breeches down to his ankles faster than Garin. "These men cast you out of society, Doc," Garin reminded him. "Show them what you really think of them." So, Dr. Barrow dropped his pants and bent over, joining Louis Armand's mutinous plan. Chapter 14, 1696, Maharashtra, India, the shrine of Sheikh Zainuddin. After traveling for hundreds of miles, Professor Josiah Farrow reached his new prison, an immaculate, empty tomb. His escort left him in shackles, but gave him a few bored glances. "Where would I run? I don't even know where I am." The guards didn't care if he walked around the space, so he inspected the white walls, lime green doorways, tiled floors, and latticed windows of the tomb. In the distance, a larger and older building loomed over the smaller tomb, but Farrow didn't know his Indian history well enough to know who it belonged to. After 3 days of waiting, Farrow finally got some answers. A familiar, corpulent man walked through the door. He wore a small white turban on his head, layers of floral print robes, and a bright red sash over his gut. He had a pencil-thin mustache and no beard, which allowed his massive double chin to be seen. "Do you remember me?" Captain Corgi Baba asked in English. "How could I forget? You killed my friend Thomas." "If he lived, you'd likely be the dead one now. Our spies knew Presider 2 would linger behind the others, and I was tasked with pirating the pirate. Fortunately for me, you were the brains behind the operation. Just like back on the Quedagh Merchant, your life is in my hands, and if you want to keep on living, you'll listen to me. My future rests on your ability to provide answers. Emperor Aurangzeb is coming to personally question you on matters important to him. Do not bring shame to my name." Thomas II's blood had soaked Josiah Farrow's clothing the first time he'd met Captain Baba. His monstrous man of war had been disguised as a merchant vessel, and it towered over the much smaller Amity and its shaken crew. Captain Baba had all the officers gathered up and brought onto the ship, leaving the crewmen behind with the ship. By the time Long Ben Avery and the others realized the trap that had befallen too, Farrow was locked in the brig with the others. The Quedagh Merchant arrived in Bombay ahead of the tragic news about the princess, and Farrow and the others were thrown into the Gujaratis' prison, while the rest of the world sorted out what had happened to the Ganji Sawai. First, John Yarlin gave him up, and then John Swan and Robert Culliford betrayed him to secure their freedom. The Order of Eos shipped him from Rhode Island to Madagascar, and now Captain Baba took him from Madagascar to the heart of the Mughal Empire. When the time came for his meeting with Emperor Aurangzeb, Captain Baba was nowhere to be seen. Only a handful of bodyguards accompanied the emperor inside of the tomb. "This is where I'll be buried," Aurangzeb began the conversation. Tall and delicate, with a flowing white beard, Aurangzeb reminded Farrow more of an Indian version of Jolly St. Nicholas than one of the most powerful men on the planet. "Surely you've seen my empty tomb." "Yes, Your Highness," Farrow answered, not sure of what to call an emperor. "I had it built right beside one of my spiritual mentors, Sheikh Zainuddin. The Hindi call me a religious tyrant and oppressor. And yes, in my youth, I certainly was a zealot, and although my religious policies continue to this day, I've changed so much since I had this first commissioned. Do you think it is possible for an older man to truly become a different person? Yes, I was a zealot when I was a young man. A Christian? A Protestant, so I breathed fire and brimstone in my youth. Emperor Aurangzeb nodded. Yes, I also breathed fire and brimstone, and with a word, I had the power to lay waste to cities. Perhaps it is more power than one man should have. From what I understand, the Order of Eos has a fascination with despots and tyrants from antiquity, including Alexander the Great. What do you know about my country's history with Alexander the Great? Flatter him. I know your people stopped him from reaching his destination, Professor Farrow coyly stated. I know Alexander searched for the same things my friend Thomas too searched for. And what is that? The old world, Farrow answered. Or at least proof of the old world. My friend Thomas believed our present world and the old world were regrown from 3 roots that touched the world. One of these roots is found in the Holy Lands, where Judaism, Christianity, and Islam now converge. Another root is located on the far side of the world in the frozen wasteland known as North America. The third root, which Alexander searched for, is beyond India. Geography and bad weather forced his army south through the Khyber Pass rather than through the mountains of Pamir. Either way, he was doomed to defeat. Yes, I have conquered all that Alexander failed to conquer. What a partnership we might have had together. I could have taken him to his third root, as you put it, and showed him the Mountain of Eden. Farrow hesitated about correcting an emperor. What is this Mountain of Eden, Your Highness? The Book of Genesis describes the Garden of Eden as the source of 4 great rivers. On the edge of my kingdom, there is a sacred mountain, the source of the Indus, the Ganges, the Brahmaputra, and the Sutlej. Just as King Nebuchadnezzar was troubled by bad dreams, I am also troubled by bad dreams and visions of the future. Like Nebuchadnezzar, I have gathered the wise men and prophets from throughout my kingdom to provide answers about my dreams. I have summoned you also to provide answers. Daniel was thrown into the lion's den for displeasing the king. What is your question? You have answered honestly about the Order of Eos seeking evidence about the old world, and while my bad dreams motivate my actions, what motivates the Order of Eos to search for evidence and relics instead of living in the here and now? I don't know. I am not part of the Order of Eos. I am only a teacher whose prized pupil became a powerful man. And now another powerful man seeks the counsel of a man without allegiances or biases. Why does Eos search? Josiah Farrow felt lightheaded, but he took a deep breath and gave the emperor what he wanted. Their belief in the old world is rooted in what we call Norse mythology, which teaches that the world is in a cycle of birth and destruction, ice and fire. Their chief god Odin discovered the truth about this cycle, including the endless war between the giants and the gods. Instead of continuing this conflict for all eternity, he sacrificed his own life to discover a way to break the cycle. If the tales are to be believed, during the last great war, which the storytellers called the Ragnarok, Odin died once more, but found a way to break the cycle. The fruits of his labors, however, were buried in the most recent cataclysm, which in the Quran is told in the story of Nuh, or Noah. The same flood that covered the world in water swept away 2 humans in the Norse tale who repopulated our present Earth. Yet, Norse describe how 4 heirs of Odin survived, yet were buried. And so too was their archenemy, a giant named Surtur. Why does Eos search? They believe they are in a race against their enemies to wake a sleeping god and usher in a new era of humanity. Do they seek the 4 or the fire giant? Aurangzeb asked. Pharaoh shrugged. Thomas too studied antiquity to make a more informed decision. He worried about unearthing the wrong sleeping god. Then we share the same nightmare, Aurangzeb admitted. Allah has placed you in front of me for a reason, so I will send you to this mountain of Eden to take measure. I want you to study it. I want you to discover its secrets. And when you learn them, come back to me with your answers. How can I say no? Garen almost fell off his feet when the adventure galley shook from the explosion. Impossible! Why won't he die? Captain Kidd asked in a panic. You knew him, Gareth. How do we stop him? I have no idea, Luis Armand said, running back to the cabin where he found the Dakota slave huddled in the corner. He threw her to her feet and held a knife to her throat as he walked her out onto the deck. Winona. Her name was Winona. When he reached the deck, the bear man was already crawling out of the hold, pierced by arrows and covered in wounds. As Dr. Barrow rushed by, the brute took hold of him, lifted him above his head, and tore him in half, throwing the 2 pieces into the water. Stop, Lesueur! Garen yelled out. I have your woman! Take one more step toward Captain Kidd and I'll kill her! Pierre-Charles Lesueur's demonic eyes flashed with bloodlust, and the axe cut through bone from skull to rib. Garen readied the knife. Lesueur kept coming, but a blade appeared in the middle of his chest. He'd been stabbed in his back. The giant staggered, falling to his knees, revealing Chief Gaspar standing behind him. I told you not to worry. Winona dissolved into smoke, and instead of holding her by the throat, Garen stood alone. Lesueur took hold of the blade that pierced his chest, slamming it backwards and into the face of Gaspar. The old warrior stumbled, and Lesueur took his head off in one quick swing. Luis Armand turned to run, only to come face to face with Winona. Not only had she reappeared, but so too did the blade, which flashed ahead of a crimson spray. Garen fell. Lesueur and Winona stood over him. The bear man looked down and muttered, I prayed for help. You were supposed to save me, not doom me to certain death. This is all your fault. The axe began to chop into his ribs, and after turning them into a mangled mess, Lesueur knelt down and stuck his hands into the bloody bowl of eels. Instead of pulling out his heart, Lesueur ripped the Philosopher's Stone from his chest. The object began to pulse with life. The pain in his ribs carried from dream into reality. But when Luis Armand Garen reached for his heart, his ribs were still intact. Fevers can cause some pretty strange nightmares, Dr. Barrow said from the other side of the room. I thought we might have to restrain you. I'm alive? It was only a dream. Lesueur was just a dream. So, who is this Winona you spoke of? Dr. Barrow asked, sweeping in to inspect his patient. What happened? Garen asked. I thought I was going to lose you. You almost got taken out by a French cannonball. The blast left some fairly large splinters of wood in you and broke some of your ribs. Lesueur? Successfully captured, thanks to you. Once you identified him, we negotiated with the French to give us the giant, which they did. After we had him, Kidd sank their ship, so there were no witnesses. In the grand scheme of things, it was a successful mission. I need to speak with him, Garin said, trying to sit up, only to see the black stains on several bandages on his legs, arms, and torso. You're tough, Garin. Broken ribs are one thing, but the infection almost killed you. I think I've got all of those slivers pulled from your flesh now. Give it time. We've got a long journey ahead of us. Wow. Are we bringing LeSueur to England? England? My dear Gareth, you've been on death's door for the better part of 3 weeks. We brought the prisoner to England already and have since sailed past Spain. We're on our way to the Madagascar finally. Can you fetch Captain Kidd? Certainly. I'm sure he'll be pleased to know you live. All the officers will be pleased. Most check on you daily. Something sinister's afoot. Back in New France, after Louis Armand had proven himself a competent field commander in fighting the Iroquois, he'd been sent by the governor to replace the commander stationed at Mackinac Island. The existing commander, it turned out, was a fraud. The Jesuits did most of the dirty work for Louis Armand d'Arcy once they found out that their former servant, Pierre Charles LeSueur, had changed his identity to Paul Bonjean and had risen to the ranks in the fur trade industry, attaining the position of commander of the fort. With Gaspar's help, Louis Armand led a bloodless coup that sent Pierre Charles LeSueur back in chains to the Jesuits in Montreal. Garin's periphery orders were to observe and create chaos. The young baron flexed his aristocratic pedigree and replaced the lying fraud LeSueur. Upon inspecting LeSueur's belongings, though, Garin learned that not only did the man once possess an ancient map believed to be in the possession of the Jesuits, but that he'd also taken a trip deep into a land of fable and mysticism, where he'd found the resting place of the Philosopher's Stone 5 years earlier. By the time Garin discovered this, LeSueur was halfway to Montreal, so with Chief Gaspar's help, the two retraced LeSueur's route and found the mound of blue vitriol deep in Sioux territory. "Gareth lives," Captain Kidd said in the doorway. "You are no longer simply Gareth. I've dubbed thee Gareth Legrand. My dear boy, it is good to see you well." Garin swam in the details of the political maneuverings. "You were paid to hunt for Pierre Charles LeSueur? He was the aristocrat who—" "Newton," Dr. Barrow finished. "He was the man Newton wanted captured alive?" "Indeed he was. Had I known that you knew the fellow, we might have been able to find him without the help of Newton's spies. Alas, he's now residing in the Tower of London, and all of us are wealthier men, thanks to our benefactor." "Did Newton say why he wanted him?" "Who cares? The man paid a kingly ransom. Why? Are you thinking this has something to do with the Order of Eos?" 3 men on the earth knew the current location of the Philosopher's Stone. Now, Isaac Newton likely shared that information. Captain Kidd was a tool, a blade. The sculptor was Isaac Newton. But what does Newton want? By the time they reached Madagascar, Garin needed to know as much as he could about Isaac Newton and their mission to Madagascar. Chapter 16, Lahore, Punjab, 1698. Born to Puritan parents in Massachusetts, Josiah Farrow still felt he was a Calvinist at heart, even though his ever-expanding worldviews led to his removal at Harvard, which brought him into the service of another former pupil, Thomas II. His private research into old conspiracies swept him up. Now, he needed these conspiracies to stay alive. Back on the Quedagh Merchant, he'd carved his name and theories into the wooden beams of the bridge so that the world would know what became of him. Now, he walked out in the open of the Alhambra Library, beholden to none and known by none. Yes, he still had his guards that traveled with him into the north, as well as his translators, prisoners who could translate texts into English. But he now lived only to serve Emperor Aurangzeb's curiosity. At the end of the year, he needed to provide Emperor Aurangzeb his theory on the history of the Order of Eos, or lose his position, a euphemistic way of saying he'd lose his life. So Pharaoh decided he needed to take a break before returning to his outline. The emerald green pleasure gardens dazzled the eye, ears, and nostrils with its samples of perfection from the empire. The wealthy and elite from Lahore often gathered here, outside the library, but he couldn't speak with them, and they couldn't speak with him. Back in Newport, he was a lonely bachelor. Now, in Lahore, he was a lonely bachelor with a vast library of texts and relics. The longer it takes Aurangzeb to read my theories about Eos, the longer I'll stay alive. So, where to begin? I must begin at the beginning. Back in Massachusetts, his puritanical views of the earth came from Genesis 10, which listed out the known nations that spread out from Mount Ararat, approximately 2 millennia before Christ. But in the Alhambra Library, he had Oriental texts going back hundreds and thousands of years before the dates of Genesis. While the timeline challenged his world age views, the shelves reinforced another unique aspect of humanity, the world flood. Neither the dates nor details aligned, but from country to country and continent to continent, the song remained the same about the flood. And so, too, did stories about an alchemist. The name of the ancient sorcerer king changed in the telling, but Pharaoh saw pieces of him wherever he looked. King Solomon studied him when trying to create a temple of unhewn stone. 1,000 years before that, King Nimrod unearthed a broken sculpture dedicated to him. Must I begin in the garden? Pharaoh wondered as he ended his stroll through the man-made paradise. It didn't matter what was true or not. The thesis just needed to fit the broken clues Aurangzeb collected. Returning to his lonely writing desk, Josiah Pharaoh dipped quill into ink and began. Once there was a mighty warrior king who stole the secrets of the gods. He had a purpose in his thievery. While gods lived on and on, men perished. So the warrior king decided that he would attain immortality while also bringing about the death of the gods. To do this, he needed a great weapon, an elixir of life. Since the gods helped shape our world, they knew the secrets of our world. So the warrior king befriended them, and little by little learned their secrets. What harm could there be in telling a mortal man, the gods wondered. So each took turns telling the warrior king their part in creation. Finally, the warrior king had the knowledge to create his great work. Imbued with the secrets of creation, his magical stone could transform matter, for the gods taught him the song they sang at the dawn of the world. The elements obeyed the commands given to them. Just as the gods determined the limited span of a man's life, they also established the lifespan of the world, determining great catastrophes to begin the world anew, lest humans discover and collect too many of these secrets. Knowing his time was limited, and the time of the world was limited, the Alchemist King willingly gave up his life to ensnare the gods. But instead of his soul descending into the depths, the soul of the Alchemist King lingered, held in place by the magic of his great work. The gods took his life and destroyed his world, but he left behind his secrets, the song. He used the great work to imprint the song into the hardest known stone known to man, knowing another great catastrophe would come soon. And it did. Death claimed the Alchemist King. Catastrophe claimed the world, but his great work remained. So too did the black stone, upon which he wrote the song, and the soul of the alchemist remained caught between worlds. Following the great flood, the men who began the story anew understood their duty. The men of the dawn, who are called the Order of Eos, held on to their black stone, and the deeds of the Alchemist King passed from one world to another. Now they search for the alchemist's tomb, and if they are able to sing the song within the presence of his great work, they will not only transform elements, but will be able to restore the alchemist back to life, ending the cycle of destruction. Josiah Pharaoh set down his quill, almost believing his own tale. But was it a story fit for an emperor? Would his tall thesis save his life? Chapter 17, Foul Point, Madagascar, 1698. At long last, Louis Armand Guerin commanded his own ship, the November, and he didn't even need to stage his mutiny. He stood at the wheel as his small sloop approached the coast. Captain Kidd had given him a skeleton crew and a mission to acquire supplies. So he headed to an unknown port in an unknown country to bargain with an unknown queen. "Benjamin, come here for a moment," Guerin called out as his little sloop approached the city. His only officer approached. Benjamin Horn, a rail-thin Abyssinian slave they'd acquired a few weeks earlier, towered over him. "Yes, Captain." "I'm a prisoner of circumstance just like you. You don't have to call me Captain." "Aye, but you are a captain, and you deserve the honor of your rank." "Well, Master Gunner, are the 4 cannons ready?" "3 of the 4, Captain. I wouldn't fire the 4th unless my life depended on it." Louis Armand Guerin turned to see the captured Queda merchant anchored in the distance. Captain Kidd and Adventure Galley were nowhere to be seen. He turned to his newest acquaintance. "Can I trust you?" "You are now my captain, and I will obey your orders." "Well, as an African man about to set foot upon an African island, you might be tempted to abandon me at first chance." "I gave you my word, Captain Legrand, and I can only hope you are also a man of honor." There had been little to no honor aboard Captain Kidd's ship during the last year. At first, Kidd took to his mission earnestly. He discreetly mapped the east coast of Africa, especially Madagascar, without ever engaging other ships. At port, he'd collect tales and allow Guerin to piece the intelligence together. Slowly and steadily, he served Newton by gathering information on the Order of Eos pirates. All the while, Louis Armand Guerin acquired the same information about Eos and also about the new enemy, Newton. While being Kidd's only confidant, Guerin secretly stoked mutiny, knowing that he'd one day need to return to the periphery with his knowledge. Kidd made that easy. The cracks began to appear back in November, when Captain Kidd murdered the previous master gunner William Moore after being pressed about engaging ships rather than skirting around ports. After crushing Moore's skull, Kidd forsook his mission and preyed upon a French ship, the Rupale, which he renamed the November. Now, with 2 ships, he could easily prey upon any ship that crossed his path. Back in January, Captain Kidd buckled to the pressures of the mutinous crew when a larger merchant ship appeared. Although Kidd's directives were only to scout out the pirate strongholds, the crew began to realize their wages had only been a promise that would be paid upon a return to England. Knowing that they were at war with France, the sight of a French flag upon the Quedagh Merchant sent the men into a frenzy, and Kidd agreed to rob her cargo and claim the ship. Instead, Kidd stepped knee-deep into shit. The Quedagh Merchant deployed layers of subterfuge, which puzzled both Garin and Kidd. An English captain, a French first mate, Armenian officers, an Indian crew, and Abyssinian prisoners. She'd surrendered without firing a shot, and it became clear that Kidd meant to claim her as a prize. The real captain then appeared with legal papers from the Mughal Empire. "I'm not worried," Kidd had boasted. "The crew needs this." "Captain, the only thing of value is a load of cotton, yet they have ransom papers worth more than the actual cargo." "My boys need spending money. Figure it out later. But let them know we're taking this ship and its cargo." In the brig, Garin had found Benjamin Horne and a carved message from a man named Josiah Farrow, in a language Garin knew well. Before reaching port to offload the prisoners and cotton, Garin interrogated Corgi Baba, the insulted former captain of the Quedagh Merchant, about the history of the ship, only to discover that Professor Josiah Farrow had been captured aboard Thomas II's Amity and delivered to Emperor Aurangzeb as a prize. At this, Garin insisted on keeping all the Abyssinians rather than selling them to the slavers. Now, like Benjamin Horne, Garin had an opportunity to be a free man simply by keeping the ship sailing to a friendly port. He needed Benjamin, so finally away from Kidd and the others, he pressed further. "Yes," Garin agreed, thinking of the sound of William Moore's breaking skull. "We certainly did need a gunner, but unlike the other men on this ship, I'm not a heathen. I've seen you praying with your countrymen. Abyssinia is a Christian nation, isn't it?" "One of the Magi came from my country." "Yes, it was Balthasar. Melchior came from the Black Forests of Germany, and Gaspar came from the Orient." Benjamin looked at him with silent incredulity. "I'll put my life in your hands," Garin agreed. "I'm a spy. I was sent to spy on the Order of Eos, which brings us to Madagascar. But Kidd serves a different master than I, and I fear it might be a darker master than anyone understands. The symbol carved into the brig?" "The Seal of Solomon," Benjamin finished. "Yes, I saw it also, along with the message. Who is this Pharaoh?" "Like us, a man in the wrong place at the wrong time. You're familiar with Solomon?" "Of course I am. My people are descended from King Solomon." "You have Hebrew blood?" "A bit." Benjamin raised his eyebrow and grinned. "After the fall of Jerusalem, during the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar, the Ark of the Covenant was brought to Sheba, as it was called then. For almost 2,000 years, we were the caretakers of the Ark, until enemies came." "Let me guess. The Knights of the Temple of Solomon?" Captain Kidd was right about the Kedar merchant. It isn't a merchant vessel at all. The Emperor Aurangzeb uses it to acquire his prizes. How do I explain this? My crew and I hunted a great fat water buffalo, and while we waited in ambush, a lion attacked us. The Kedar merchant was the lion? Garen gathered. So tell me about this great fat water buffalo. Benjamin took a moment to gather his thoughts. Abyssinia is a landlocked African nation, yet I was made a captain of a vessel with a specific purpose, to find and secure stolen valuables. When the world learned of the nation of pirates living on Madagascar, all sorts of predators took an interest in the great, fat, wounded water buffalo. I knew that the time was of the essence, so I kept my ship near Antongal Bay, hoping to learn about our stolen treasure. And what treasure is that? The Ark of the Covenant. After the real Ark of the Covenant was brought from Jerusalem to Sheba, 11 exact replicas were made, so that there were 12 churches that held the sacred treasure. When the Templars came, they managed to steal one of the 12 arks, and only the high priest knew it was the right one. To us, they all represent the same promise from God. For generations, the Templars hid from the world, and with the bright lights now upon them, I hoped they would leave their hole with our treasure. An honorable purpose, Garen added. So instead of finding it, a Mughal ship captured you instead. The lion attacked the hyena instead of the fat buffalo. They used my crew to man the cannons of the Kedar merchant, and when they discovered my purpose, they locked me in the brig with plans to help me bring me back to India. Of course, Captain Kidd kept that from happening. Yes, he did, Garen added. What would you be willing to pay for the return of the Ark? I don't know how to answer that. Would you be willing to trade a lesser relic for such a sacred relic? Likely. I'm beginning to form a convoluted plan, one that the Lord has placed before me. First, we have a queen to meet, and then we'll talk more about my plan. With Benjamin at his side, Luis Armand Garen knelt before Queen Rehena. It had taken a week and countless bribes, and just when it seemed like the whole idea was going nowhere, an envoy from the Queen invited the diplomats to court. Ambassador Legrand, her vizier repeated in French to her. Why have you come to my country? Queen Rehena asked in French. In addition to her ability to speak his language, her youth and beauty also surprised him. One look at the palace at Foul Point, and it became obvious that the secret island had been trading on the global market for centuries. My lady, I serve upon an English ship charged with hunting down the pirates who attacked Emperor Aurangzeb's daughter. The world has been fed a lie, Queen Rehena boldly stated. The Emperor has 4 daughters, and none of them were killed in the attack on the Ganges Swai. Do not believe the lies of Aurangzeb. What lies is she talking about? Nevertheless, England is an important trade partner, and the pirates who attacked the Ganges Swai were English. Those men might have spoken English, but I can assure you, none of them acted on behalf of England. She knew them. How do you know these pirates that attacked the Emperor's caravan? One of them was my husband and king, Thomas too. He made promises also, but now I am a widow, ignored by the men who hold my country hostage. And what did two promise her? I come here only asking for supplies so that we might hunt down these criminals. That is all I want. What does your highness want? I want honesty, Ambassador Legrand. How is that for a beginning? The world is dangerous, and an honest man is always at risk in a world filled with dishonest men. Garin turned to reference the international crowd. Ah, I see. Then walk with me. I've had enough of promises made in public. Perhaps you can find your honesty in private. Your man can watch from a distance, just like my brother will be watching from a distance, so that no harm will come to either of us in my garden. A few minutes later, Louis Armand Garin walked with the beautiful young queen. "Where are you from?" she asked. So he told her some truth, including being born a bastard and his time in New France. She deserved the truth of his birth name, Louis Armand Garin. "And I will offer you a coin worth much more than the story of my birth. I am also known to the world as Louis Armand de l'Homme d'Arcy, the Baron of Lahatan. For seducing a governor's daughter, I am a wanted man with a great bounty placed upon my head. So if you'd give my head to the King of France, along with my name, you could make yourself a small fortune and a temporary ally." "Seducing a governor's daughter?" Rahena repeated. "There are many fathers and husbands that had reason to take my life. But when the fate of humanity is on the line, a little seduction is the least of crimes." "And how is it that an explorer from the far side of the world ends up at Foul Point?" "Your Highness, it is my turn to ask a few questions." "And what would you like to know?" "What did Aurangzeb promise you to betray your husband?" Garin asked in turn. This took the smile from her face. Instead of immediate denial, she took several moments to process what he said. "I'm trying to save my people from extermination. For generations, we've been an invisible nation hidden away from the rest of the world. But we are not isolated. I know all about the wars that are waged around the world. Here on Madagascar, I rule as queen. My own people despise the Zanamolata for being mixed race. In the highlands, the Marina plot our downfall and try to rally other tribes to their cause. Emperor Aurangzeb promised to give the country back to my people. He promised to free us from our overlords, including my own master, my husband Thomas too. Now Thomas is dead, and the chieftains remain. The emperor will now sit back and let his enemies fight amongst themselves," Garin explained. "England is preparing to do his dirty work for him. You were right to fear, but Aurangzeb was a poor choice to save you." "What would you have done?" "Would you believe it if I said that I had the power to help you?" She laughed. "You are only a handsome face meant to garner kindness." "I'm serious," Garin added. "I did not get a choice in matters, and I served Captain Kidd under threat of death. If I had my freedom and means to travel, I'd return to my powerful allies. But alas, they have no idea where I've gone." "Are you asking for me to save you?" "Not at this time. As I said, I'm a spy, and fate has brought me to the other side of the world, with all of its secrets. You know my secret, and I know your secret. I sincerely would like to help you and your people, before the dark days come. But for now, I play the part of Gareth Legrand, and if you can manage to help us with our supplies, I would be in your debt if I ever return in a position of strength rather than weakness. I don't believe a word you're saying, Rahina admitted. But you put a smile on my face. I'll send you back with as many supplies as your ship can carry. And then what will happen to you? We'll have 3 ships to properly hunt for these pirates. I'll likely die in battle or of some foul tropical disease. This is most likely be the only time we meet. That's a pity, Rahina said and smiled. Before you leave, tell me the story of the governor's daughter. Chapter 18, St. Mary's Island, Madagascar, June 1698. Who am I, you ask? I am Louis Armand Guerin, my mother's only child, bastard son of Isaac de Lhomme d'Arcy, the Baron of Lahatan. I am King Louis's trusted officer, the savior of Quebec and the defender of Placentia. The Huron are my friends, and the Iroquois are my enemies. More recently, I am the pirate Gareth Legrand, the first mate on Captain Kidd's adventure prize. I have stood at the doors of the secret city, walked over the treasure vault at Oak Island, and discovered the resting place of the Philosopher's Stone beyond the River of Death in the dreaded Haunted Valley. I am the Sword of the Spirit. Oh yes, and by blind luck, I stumbled across the lost Templar fleet and discovered clues to one of the world's great mysteries. Is that enough to make you put the knife away? Will all this useless knowledge in my head save me from the flames? Just ask the right questions, and I'll give you the answers. Louis Armand looked up to see John Swan holding a heavy chain, which he swung in a circular motion at his side as he advanced on the next victim. Including himself, there were 15 crew members of the Adventure Prize still alive. The others savagely slaughtered by the great beast Swan. They're looking to me to save them, but I've sworn a holy oath. I'll die rather than betray the secrets of the periphery. Kill me next so I don't have to see my friends die. John Swan towered over the average man, but with Nuno Cavalieri already on his knees, the savage executioner looked like a giant. Swan wore a leather pocket vest over his blood-splattered torso. All manners of torture protruded from these pockets. If not for the certainty of the gun crew behind him, Louis Armand would have thrown himself overboard to drown in the waters of the Indian Ocean. Still swinging the heavy chain, Swan looked to his master, Captain Robert Culliford, the bait for this trap. Few crew members remained from 1689 when Captain Kidd's history with Captain Robert Culliford began. 9 years ago, on the other side of the planet, the West Indies, Culliford and Swan stole Kidd's ship while it was anchored offshore of Antigua. The crime was not forgotten, leading Kidd right into the trap. Now, one by one, will die because of the great fool. Unlike the beast Swan, Culliford was a small, dainty man, dressed in a yellow and black checkered cloak and matching yellow pants. With a nod from Culliford, Swan began to remove chunks of flesh from poor Nuno's head. The screams kept coming even after the heavy chain shattered the left side of the man's jaw, but terror was the point. For several hours, the executioner worked his way up the captured crew's hierarchy, until now only the officers remained, disgusted and terrified. Finally, with a downward swing of the chains, the screaming stopped and the death spasms began. Men from Culliford's crew dragged the body away. That one, Culliford said, pointing right at Louis Armand. He's the smallest of the bunch. Surely a man lacking physical value must have intellectual value. Put away your chains. This one will need the slow blade. Louis Armand felt himself go limp, and Culliford's henchman pulled him up by his armpits to where the brains, bone, and blood of Nuno Cavalli pooled. For dust you are, and dust you shall return. Dear Lord, why did you give me the pieces of the puzzle if I am not meant to live long enough to solve it? How do I protect my oath and still find a way to survive this ordeal? How, Lord? More than a dozen men had died in the spot where Louis Armand now sat, and the gaze of Captain Culliford burned its light upon him. And what is your name? Who do you want me to be? Louis Armand teased playfully, bringing chuckles from the surviving crew of the Adventure Prize. Louis Armand winked in their direction. They were mostly ruthless brigands doomed to the fires of hell, but he'd developed the bond of kinship over the last several years. Giovanni Naufragio, the skilled Italian carpenter. Jago Firkin, the supply room manager. Pierre Dulac, the Haitian cook who practiced voodoo. Thomas Barrow, the surgeon cast out from society for his unethical practices. Drake Murray, the bosun, and one of the few Englishmen remaining. Jimmy Duke, the brash American looking for adventure. Benjamin Horn, the Ethiopian master gunner. Naroban, the Himalayan sailing master making a map of the world. Manuel del Toro, the Puerto Rican quartermaster. Several Ethiopian boys also sat amongst his friends. Swan had mercilessly killed a few of the powder monkeys, the young boys who manned the guns during battle, but aside from bawling like terrified lambs, the boys knew nothing about Captain Kidd's mission. The knuckles of John Swan backhanded his cheek. Then, call me Georgetta, Louis Armand said, remembering the governor's daughter that sent him from North America to the Indian Ocean, and blew Culliford a kiss. At this, Culliford walked over to Swan and took one of the blades from his vest. Hold him! Open his mouth! Fetch the pincers! Hold! One of the guards shouted, although Louis Armand couldn't see which of his friends risked everything. The pincers, apparently, ready to take hold of his tongue. Wait, Captain Culliford said, turning to his own crewmen. Are you sure this man is Captain Kidd's first mate? Aye, he's the one who took charge once he sensed our trap. We even found a notebook on him. An educated man pretending to be obstinate, Culliford assessed. No. We'll save him for the end. But I want him to think things over while he waits. So, open his eye. The rough hands that held him by the jaw suddenly shifted to his forehead, and two hands spread open his eyelids. The tip of the blade loomed, and then a crimson sheet blinded him before the flashes of pain blinded his brain. With his good eye, Louis Armand saw Culliford leaning in, inspecting his macabre work as he shifted from blade to spoon and back to blade. When they threw Louis Armand back with the crew, the screaming stopped, his own screaming this time. Culliford set the eyeball on the deck in front of him and walked back to torture the next victim. How did I get here? It had been an impressive trap. A few weeks earlier, the Adventure Prize hunted down the pirate ship Fidelia, whose captain denied knowing Henry Avery or any other pirates associated with the Ganji Swai massacre. But he did know the pirate Culliford, who was hiding at an island north of Fall Point. Sure enough, Culliford's ship was anchored, and Kidd went rushing in to blast his old rival out of the water. only to have several other pirate ships seal the bay behind them. Captain Kidd immediately surrendered, hoping to hide the fact that they were hired by the British government to hunt down pirates. After negotiations failed, Kidd was kept aboard Culliford's Mocha frigate, and Swan methodically began torturing the crew. Am I going to die beside these pirates? Luis Armand wallowed in agony for the next several minutes, but when Jago Firkin's screams ended and his body was tossed overboard, Luis Armand sobered up. Think, damn it, think, or all this will have been in vain. Captain Culliford pointed to Benjamin Horn, the Ethiopian gunner. Son of a bitch! Of all the crewmen, I need Benjamin the most. I have to give him something of value. Luis Armand shouted, Spare him, the remaining crew, and the ship, and I will make you a wealthy man. Do we have a deal? Swan held a blade under the chin of Horn. Robert Culliford threatened to destroy all of their plans. A deal? Who do you think you are? You're all going to die if you don't listen to me, Garin added. Culliford mocked him, looked out over the horizon for help that wasn't there. He even looked up to the blue skies of the heavens. I don't believe you. The two men chuckled. The nerves in his severed eyeball echoed and rattled at speaking, but Luis Armand found the resolve to bargain for his life. Captain Kidd was hired by the English government to hunt down and kill the pirates responsible for the Ganges Y massacre. We knew all about this a dozen men ago. How is this worth saving your lives? But we're not hunting pirates. I tried to warn Captain Kidd about seeking revenge against you, but he ignored my advice and chose his own selfish agenda above the mission he'd been hired to perform. Culliford raised an eyebrow as if curious, but then muttered, Cut off his ear. Swan sliced Benjamin Horn's ear from his head, leaving a bloody inner ear hole behind. Is this where you threaten me? Culliford said. You're only a hired gun, or else you'd be interrogating Captain Kidd rather than turning him over to your masters, Luis Armand taunted. I can give you a spot at the table. I can give you a treasure greater than goods and coin if you're smart enough to understand. Smart enough? Perhaps you're the fool. How many more body parts must we hack off before you just give me what I want? Show him you're serious. Even though his arms were bound behind his back, keeping him from attacking the men taunting him, Luis Armand still had a way of striking. He bent down, faced the deck planks, and when he straightened his back, he spit his own severed eyeball into the chest of Captain Culliford, who stepped back in shock and disgust. We are hunting the lost Templar fleet, Luis Armand confessed. Even if you spare our lives today and set us free, Captain Kidd is a dead man. The man who hired us used the Ganges Y massacre as a pretense to wage war. Your enemy is mobilizing a great fleet that will wipe your secret pirate colony from the face of the earth. For centuries, the Order of Eos has hidden from the eyes and ears of Europe on the far side of the world. Instead of hunting pirates, Captain Kidd was tasked with scouting Madagascar and all the known pirate hideouts, so that when the hammer falls, the next massacre will be complete. Culliford looked down at the blood spot on his chest. Who hired you? Luis Armand let himself become the scholar once again, and muttered the old Sanskrit proverb. The king who is situated anywhere immediately on the circumference of the conqueror's territory is termed the enemy. The king who is likewise situated close to the enemy, but separated from the conqueror only by the enemy, is termed the friend. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. We should not have to pay for our blunder of our foolish captain. Promise me you'll abide by my terms, and I'll give you the name of our true enemy. I'm content skinning every last one of these men alive, including you, to get the truth from your lips, because tonight it won't really change anything, will it? You'll be dead, and I'll be stuck in Madagascar. You and I are both soldiers in this war, but I don't think you know what's at stake. The Templars? Yeah, I know about it. How is this going to change my lot in life? The world is controlled by puppet masters, not by kings and queens. You have a master. I have a master. Captain Kidd has a master, and Kidd's master will soon destroy each and every last one of you, unless you heed my warning. A name for your life? You could just give me the name of the boogeyman, and I let you and your friends free? That's not fun. You could say John Swan is the puppet master. John Swan, the monstrous butcher, chuckled at the comment. I agree, which is why you must let Captain Kidd live. Culliford chuckled. Where are the pensioners? If I give you the name, the value in that knowledge lies in identifying your enemy. Right now, he is a phantom, hiding behind a mask. The man who hired Captain Kidd will not allow him to live after betraying his purpose. Kidd ruined the element of surprise. If you send Kidd back to civilization like a spanked child, the ally that gives him up is none other than the great shepherd for the Priory of Ormus. The smile left Culliford's face, and he turned to Swan. Dalziel told me stories about the Priory of Ormus. He said the Priory joined with its enemies to wipe out the Templars and hunt down the Order of Eos. How do you know about the Priory? I've been spying on Kidd and the Priory of Ormus for the better part of 5 years now, which is why my name may as well be Georgetta. The Priory of Ormus and the Order of Eos has been battling each other for centuries now. I was sent to the New World to discover what they have been chasing after. And what are they chasing after? On the surface, they are hunting for something called the Philosopher's Stone, a legendary object rumored to be able to transform matter from lead into gold. I've heard of it, so what? On its maiden voyage, the Adventure Galley, Captain Kidd's previous ship before he took this one as his prize, we attacked a French warship carrying a crew of miners and a man who discovered the location of the Philosopher's Stone. The same puppet master who ordered us to capture this man then sent us to the Indian Ocean to scout Madagascar. Unfortunately, ego got in the way. If I give you the name of this man, your puppet master will simply watch to see what happens. When the truth is confirmed, he will know his enemy and will save his people from another the Friday the 13th massacre. Captain Culliford motioned for John Swan for a private conversation, and the two stepped away. Despite wincing in pain, Benjamin Horn nodded in affirmation. Luis Armand turned to his wide-eyed friends, who, like Captain Kidd, had no clue about Eos, Ormus, or even the Periphery. He didn't need to tell lies to them or Culliford. He only had to give them a peek at the truth. This might work. Back on the frontier, the truth had turned Chief Gaspar into a blood brother and ally. He didn't mind spreading chaos into the world, and he certainly had something to trade if it came to more torture. When the conversation took 10 minutes, Garen winked at the crew with his good eye. "We accept your proposal," Culliford gleefully announced. "Shit, what do I have to lose? Before we release the 13 of you and return your foolish captain, we're going to strip your ship of anything not fastened down, just to make this seizure slightly profitable, and to give us a head start. If what you say is true, I need time to get ahead of this global catastrophe about to erupt. I need to warn my allies, and then find a spot to hide. Swan and I want to live long enough to spend our wealth." Swan nodded and cut Benjamin Horn free of his bonds. A moment later, he walked over to stand behind Louis Armand and cut his bonds free. His hand immediately went to his empty eye socket. "At least the Lord gave me two." The Grand Shepherd of the Priory of Ormus began as a scientist with an obsession with the Philosopher's Stone and alchemy, but now he is the master of the mint for the British Empire. With other people's money, he's building a fleet that will destroy his enemies. A few years ago, when I brought him Pierre Charles Lesueur as a prisoner, he used the Tower of London as his base of operations. Your enemy is Isaac Newton. The end of part 1.